Hi everyone and welcome to my channel, and to this video where today I'm going to talk all about blending soft pastel. Why you might want to blend, how your paper choice will affect it, and all the many tools that you can use to blend pastel. Both proper art materials and also cheaper items that you might already have in your home. I hope you enjoy this, and if you do then please do subscribe to me here on YouTube. I have a ton of these informational videos if you need help with any aspect of soft pastel. And if you'd like even more, or you want to support me in making these videos, then come and join me on Patreon, where you'll gain access to my full library of real-time tutorials. I'll add those links in the description below. So firstly, why would you want to blend soft pastel? It's an incredibly versatile medium, and you can use it much like how you use oil paints, for example, building up the layers, gradually working from dark to light, mixing colours on the surface, creating either sharp detail or soft out of focus effects. And the more out of focus the effect is, the more I'll have blended that area to achieve that. The quality of the pastels that you're using and the type of paper that you're using will affect how easily the pastel blends. So for example, on these non-sanded papers, like the lighter weight ombre papers, the pastel moves around a lot and it can quickly turn into a muddy mess if you're not careful. And that's mostly because these papers aren't designed to accept multiple layers of pastel. They will do it, but they're not as good as the heavier sanded papers for that job. This is why I prefer the sanded or coated papers like Pastel Matte, Velour, Fisher 400, UArt. There are many choices on the market. These papers can hold many layers of pastel, and the pastel sticks better to the surface. On some of these surfaces it might even feel quite difficult to blend the pigment, as it doesn't seem to want to move as much. But to me that's a bonus, as I want more control and to build up the effects gradually. With some of these papers, you really need to have 2 or 3 layers of pigment already on the paper before things start to move and blend nicely together. But if you want to know more about pastel papers, then check out my giant pastel paper comparison video where I show you all the pros and cons of 15 different pastel surfaces. But I thought it was important to at least mention in this video that the type of paper you're using will greatly affect how much the pastel pigment blends. But let's get on to the many different types of tools that you can use to blend. My number one tool for blending is my fingertips. I would say I use my fingers for about 90% of all blending that I do. I love how hands-on pastel is, and it's also quite easily washed off, so it's not a big deal getting it all over your hands. The control that I have with my fingertips is great because I can really alter the pressure that I apply depending on how much I want the pigment to mix together. For example, with a background like this one, I'll blend lots and quite heavily. I'll apply several layers of pastel, blending in between each layer, and I'll often use circular motions to blend this together. Then for areas of fur that have a softer, blurred look, I'll use my fingers more lightly to soften the marks in the direction of the fur. So the pressure and the direction that you blend will really alter the effects. And if you don't like the feeling of pastel pigment on your hands, I know many pastel artists who wear gloves or those little finger cuts for blending. Either way, your hands are your most useful tool when it comes to pastel. Good news, because they're free, right? But what else can you use to blend? Let's have a look at some proper art materials, and for each one I'll give you an alternative that you might find in a hardware store or even in a pharmacy. Starting with these little sponges from Pastel Soft Tools range. They're just made from a foam or sponge material, and they come in different shapes and sizes. Great for blending larger areas of colour, but also good for smaller areas as you can make use of little pointed edges. Of course, there are very similar alternatives to this. I know of some artists who buy sheets of packing foam and then cut their own shapes from it. Some people even recycle the little polystyrene foam things that you get inside a parcel. If it has a foam or sponge texture, then you can use it to blend pastel. Next, let's talk about these Da Vinci pastel blenders that I bought in a packet. Now, some of these are very like paintbrushes. In fact, they pretty much are paintbrushes. And you can use brushes to blend, especially if you want to create some interesting textures. After all, pastel is just pigment without the wet elements added to acrylics or oils, for example. But the one I wanted to mention in this pack is this pointed sponge tool. I find this one great for finer detail where my fingertip is just too wide. And what do these remind you of? Well, if you've ever applied eyeshadow, you'll recognise this sponge shape. Take a look in a pharmacy or at a makeup counter for makeup applicators. They're exactly the same as this. The only pro to the art tool is the longer handle, which makes it easier to hold. And this particular tool comes with changeable heads, so you can freshen up and reuse the handle, which is nice. And another tool that you can buy that's quite similar to this is a little tool with rubber ends on it. So just instead of foam, the ends are rubber. I don't actually have any of these because I don't really use them, but they are also quite good and they come in a range of different shapes and sizes. It's always worth experimenting with these just to see which works best for you. Next, let's look at these tools made by Soft, commonly used along with pan pastels, but I use them all the time with my pastel sticks. These are great and they come in a range of different shapes with changeable heads. I like to keep one for blending dark colours and one for blending light colours. And again, these are really similar to certain makeup applicators, but what I like most about these is the handle. They're lovely to hold, almost like a palette knife. And for that reason, I really enjoy using these. And by the way, I will add links to where you can purchase all of the products that I'm mentioning today. Although you don't always need to buy specifically made for art tools. In this case, I would definitely recommend these Soft applicators, if nothing else, just for their lovely handles. And lastly, let's look at these paper tortillons. Now these are the first blenders I ever used, and it's really just paper that's been rolled and compressed with a point at either end. Again, you could keep one side cleaner for light colours, and they come in a range of different sizes. These are what I use more often on the velour paper, as a lot of these other sponge blenders don't work very well on velour. The sponge textures work really well on the smoother sanded papers, but these work great on velour. And you can see these have been very well used over the years. They're really cheap to buy, and you normally get a pack with different sizes. I might use these to drag pigment out where my fingertips are too wide, or even to clean up or crisp up a sharp edge. So not only can you blend and mix the colours with all of these tools, you can also use them to create a crisp edge as well as soft out of focus effects. As a very final mention, There are even times I will use my pastel pencils to blend the pigment I've already put down with the big sticks. Sometimes I'm not looking for much pigment to come off the pencils, more that I'm using a similar colour of pencil to soften and smooth the pigment. This is especially useful in fine-tuning skin tones. The divisions between tonal values on faces are often soft and subtle, and I like to use the pencils lightly to blend those areas. Like I mentioned though, if you're interested in any of these art tools that I've mentioned, I'll add links in my description below of where you can purchase them. Or why don't you look in your local hardware store or at a makeup counter and see what you can find. I'd love to hear if you've discovered something I didn't mention in this video, so leave me a comment and let us know. But I hope that you found this helpful and that it gives you some ideas of how to blend and what to use. Please do subscribe here on YouTube, and if you'd like to learn even more, then visit me on Patreon. You can check out my full catalogue of available tutorials on my website, emmacolbertart.com. All links in the description below. Thanks very much for watching here, and until next time, happy pasteling.